The core is locked up, but how long is the championship window exactly? We'll discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, September 8th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you'd find me on X at MondoMan12, and you can follow the show anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. And today we are going to discuss how long the window is actually, although the core is locked up for the most part, 10 players at least until 2030. We're also going to discuss the recent history of teams who have signed guys to long-term and what it's looked like from the time that they've won their last cup all the way to the time a majority of those contracts have ended, and even teams that are currently in that place. And also we are going to discuss Carter Verhaeghe's day with the cup. But I also want to start this show with telling you guys how privileged I am to not only host this show, but also to cover a winning team in the South Florida market, because outside of the Florida Panthers, South Florida sports is not in a great place with everything that happened with the Miami Dolphins on their opener yesterday against the Indianapolis Colts, losing 33-8, which I'm the pessimistic Dolphins fan, so I'm not necessarily surprised that this was the result, but it's like prove it to me before I start buying in again fully. But I will still watch the games that I'm still representing. But hey, at least we have the Panthers, right? So that's the positive. As it's great because this Friday, the Prospect Showcase starts in Tampa. It'll wrap up on Monday as well. And then media day is just a few days after. And then we'll get first practices, the scrimmage against Nashville. So hockey is just around the corner once again. And I hope that you guys also felt that energy last week when September 1st when the calendar first hit September. And we're already 1 week into September. But let's go on with the topics on today's show, which, yeah, the core is locked up. I mean, it's still outstanding, and it's been a few months since Bill Zito and each of the key free agents for the Florida Panthers, Brad Marchand, Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad, all were able to agree to terms to long-term contract extensions with the Florida Panthers. And obviously some of the trades that they made for guys as in Seth Jones, and even the players even before that were recently drafted with the Panthers, like Alexander Barkov and Anton Lundell, even though his contract is going to be ending by the time he gets to his prime at 27, 28 years old. So it's also a credit to Bill Zito, where even though he's dished out first round picks for the most part, like it was candy, the first round picks that he's had at his disposal have been working out so well, like an Anton Lundell. Mackie Samoskevich is still a little bit of a project, but even to use an asset from the previous regime in Spencer Knight, who was a first-round pick, although Bill Zito is the one responsible for extending him, he found a way to get that, ship out that piece, which I've said this over and over again, how whenever Spencer Knight is not starting, that's basically dead cap on your roster. When he was sent down to the AHL for that full season in the 2024 year, only $1.15 million of his cap hit came off the books. So it was still a little bit of an anchor. And still, even after all that, the Panthers still found a way to win the Stanley Cup and still have the buyout money of Keith Yandel on their books. Well, $1.2 million of it only at the time, but still, it's still incredible cap management. And the fact that Bill Zito is able to use that, at least in the short term, for the Florida Panthers here. And now it's all about just trying to fill in the pieces around the core in these next few years. But we're not only celebrating the fact that this team is a back-to-back championship team. But the fact is that this is a celebration of what this team went through and are continuing to go through, whether it is actually winning the Stanley Cup or not. It's a team that the community is going to be able to identify for years to come. Whenever let's say the year is like 2050 and you think about the Florida Panthers of the 2020, you're gonna get people in conversation talking about, man, I remember when they were at the peak of their powers, and you could list all the names of the players on the team, and you're gonna be talking to people who are gonna be adults that later on in life and thinking, oh wow, I was a kid, and because the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup, that's how I became a fan. You're gonna hear those type of stories, and that's also another factor when it comes to extending these players that fans have fallen in love with. I mean, in the example of the Florida Marlins in 2003, I was 10 years old when they won that championship. That's how I became a diehard baseball fan as well, because they started winning. And that's the same thing. That's the same thing when it comes to the Florida Panthers, to especially kids who are under the age of 18 as well. These are role models, guys they look up to. And I mean, it's great the fact that the community is going to be able to see these guys on the, not on the daily, but seeing them on their TV screens in an 82 game season, soon to be 84. But even guys who are accessible around the community, if you are casually walking around downtown Fort Lauderdale or going to a restaurant, these guys say hi to fans. They take pictures. They are very approachable. They're very kind to the media, as I've asked multiple questions to them over the years, and they haven't fought back. I mean, there hasn't been questions to ask even to them about them needing to fight back on words back to us at the media as well, because hey, winning cures so many things. Obviously, it's going to be a test when things the train goes off the tracks just a little bit. Like, there's no doubt about that. But for the most part, they've been very kind to the entire community, and it starts with, like I said, the leadership with the guy who wears the C on his chest, and Alexander Barkov. The coach even spoke about how much they loved each other before he even got hired with the Florida Panthers as well. So I mean, that's gonna be as far as that leadership and continuing that I don't expect that part to change. But I mean, you do get older, and with age, you do get a little slower as well. Things start to hurt a little bit, as I'm somewhat experiencing that as a person in my 30s. But I mean, think about even not we talk about the length of contracts, of what age they'll take them to, but let's even talk about the halfway point of where these guys, as far as where their ages will be when we get to 2028. I mean, Barkov will be 33, Tkachuk 30, Sam Reinhart 32, Bennett 32, Carter Verhaeghe 33, Brad Marchand will be 40, Seth Jones 33, Aaron Ekblad 32, Gustav Forsling 32. So more of those guys will be in their 30s, and this went from one of the youngest teams in the NHL already quickly to one of the oldest, or they're going to be at least. So I think about that factor of how the game, we talk about how the NHL game is a lot faster, a lot better, and a lot more skilled. And you think about some of the up and coming teams around the Atlantic Division, which we might take a little bit of a deeper dive, but some of the up and coming teams like an Ottawa Senators and Montreal Canadiens, who are actually really fun teams to watch. And how will the Panthers be able to keep up that same speed as they have done? And obviously thankfully with their style of play, their game is not a speed type of game, run and gun type of offense. So that is at least the good news about that. But bodies start to break down. These long playoff runs can take that toll over the years. So I mean, and who knows what place emotionally other guys in the organization will be by the time even the halfway point, like I mentioned, will be. Will Bill Zito want to give the general manager to someone in the who's an assistant up and coming, like maybe a Brett Peterson? Will he want to be the guy who runs the day-to-day operations instead of, or I know he's the president of hockey operations. Will he just want to be that and that only? I know Dale Talon in the mid 2010s, he was not the general manager for the Florida Panthers, and he gave that role to Tom Rowe, which which after that, Tom Rowe traded Dmitry Kulikov. He extended Aaron Ekblad as well. So that's another thing of is Bill Zito, will he want to let go of that midway through what's remaining of this core? And also Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice is the 8th oldest coach in the NHL. He doesn't look like it. He's aged so well, like fine wine. And also take into consideration, he started coaching in the NHL at 28 years old when he was with the Hartford Whalers. And based on his responses and how he approaches this career, and I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what he's thinking, but I can kind of say, I can kind of imagine that he doesn't put his entire identity in just being a coach. If you guys know what I mean there, that his worth as a human is not whether he wins or whether he loses. He feels that his worth is based mostly on how he treats people, how he's present for his kids as well, more than likely. So I think that that's also something that he's likely going to be considering in the next few years. And honestly, he has nothing more to prove with the Florida Panthers organization. And honestly, when the way he left Winnipeg, I'm sure that it's still a sour taste in the mouths of Jets fans. But for the Florida Panthers, obviously winning and accomplishing everything that fans have dreamed about from a human side of things, I want him to go out on his term. I don't want him to be burnt out and think that he doesn't want and get to a point where his mind makes the decision for him instead of him. The mind as in the burnout making the decision for him, as opposed to him saying, okay, this will in the next few months, in the next year, and make a decision at least ahead of time, saying this will be it after this, and make a slow progression and celebrate them. And also, the Panthers have a few questions on what they're going to do in the goaltending department after Sergei Bobrovsky. I know he might sign a 1-year deal, might not, but also there's also that question about who's going to be between the pipes on what goes on. So it's not exactly clear that just because they're signed to 2030 that their window is going to be exactly that 5-year remaining period that this team is locked up for. So just wanted to at least have you guys consider the fact that right now we're spoiled in South Florida with the state of everything, but at least we have the Panthers once again. We are looking forward to once again another exciting season here in South Florida. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2. We were going to discuss the recent history of teams that have locked up cores and what they've looked like post their championship runs. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets across the app. And I love using FanDuel because sometimes you're able to get some same-game parlays and able to get some big winnings, some anytime touchdowns from the following of Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, which that was one thrilling game last night on Sunday Night Football in the Buffalo Bills comeback win. Although it doesn't help the Dolphins' chances of possibly rebounding and winning the AFC East after that horrible performance. But there is always next week, and you could look at FanDuel to look at the bets as they welcome in the New England Patriots at Hard Rock Stadium on Sunday afternoon from South Florida. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And yes, once again, less than 2 weeks until we have some type of hockey action, at least from the professional team. But we still have the prospects that are going to be taking the ice later this week. And I'm just so thankful. Once again, I come to this podcast with a hell of a lot of gratitude. I will not deny that based on, once again, everything going on in the South Florida sports scene. But let's talk about teams that have had cores signed for a long period of time and have had struggles with possibly keeping up once their window has officially been shut. I mean, yeah, we just had a crossover with Locked On Blackhawks host Jack Bushman just recently, but I think about what's happened even a little bit after their last cup final win in 2015 for the Chicago Blackhawks. And I mean, listen, I was one of the rare people who looked at that 2020 Stanley Cup championship bubble in the qualifying round, which in that year the Panthers lost to the New York Islanders 3-1. And in the Western side of things, the Chicago Blackhawks were going up against the Edmonton Oilers. Let's not forget, they added the 4 additional teams who were at least in the top 12 at the time to face a playoff series. So it was 12 versus 5, 11 versus 6, and so on, while the first 4 played the round robin to determine seeding. Crazy, the Bruins won the President's Trophy, and they ended up being the 4th seed that year. But, I mean, part of the core was still intact for the Chicago Blackhawks, like Taves, Kane were still there. Corey Crawford was still the goaltender for the Chicago Blackhawks at the time. So there was still that championship core there, able to at least with that experience, it mattered in that series, but they didn't really get far after that. I mean, and from a technicality, they still hadn't won a playoff series since 2015. It's funny because we count the Panthers making the playoffs 6 straight seasons, even though they lost in the qualifying round. But 2015 for Chicago felt like a last dance. I mean, in 2016, they came down 3-1, even won a double overtime game scored by Patrick Kane in Game 5. It was a 3-3 game in the third period against the St. Louis Blues in Game 7. And then former Panther, Troy Brouwer, he scored the game-winning goal in the third period. And then the St. Louis Blues ended up winning that series in 7 games, like that historic Chicago-St. Louis rivalry, the St. Louis part of the second 6 after the league expanded in 1967. But also think about that the year after that where Corey Crawford was dealing with some injuries. Anton Forsberg was taking the majority of the starts. And I mentioned the Panthers and their age at the halfway point between now and 2030. In 2028, let's talk about the Chicago Blackhawks there a few years after the fact of them winning their last Stanley Cup. Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane were 29 years old. Duncan Keith was 34, 3-time Norris Trophy winner. Sorry, 2-time Norris Trophy winner. Brent Seabrook was 32. He didn't even get to finish the entirety of his deal. It just recently expired, as we talked about. Patrick Sharp was 36 years old going into that. Corey no, I already mentioned his age, my bad, there. But also we're seeing it right now with Pittsburgh, which Crosby signed another 2-year extension at the same price of what his recent contract was. And he's made it clear that he wants to re-sign he wants to retire as a Pittsburgh Penguin. Yeah, there's rumors about him joining Nathan McKinnon. What is he going to be? Is he going to go for that? Is he going to be part of that last ride with getting a cup? But it's likely not going to be in Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh, even after their last cup, they were consistently in the postseason. The last time they didn't make it prior to that was Sidney Crosby's first season. And to think that Pittsburgh has gone through so many different financial issues, they're about to be sold again. Fenway bought them, and now they're trying to sell the team again. So Sidney Crosby's definitely kept that team afloat, but also the guys that they've lost throughout the year. Marc-Andre Fleury to the expansion draft. The injuries to Matt Murray hurt him, and then he was eventually traded to the Ottawa Senators, and then got top pair defenseman Brian Dumoulin. He's still in the league, but the Pittsburgh Penguins weren't able to keep him. Brian Rust is getting up there in age. He's likely going to be one of those guys who are probably going to be there's going to be an early season trade, I'm predicting, from the Pittsburgh Penguins, because I haven't really talked about this, about what's going on in the new CBA, but double retention is going away. And, well, it's not necessarily going away, but there's a longer period in which you can trade guys. So once the guy is traded and you retain a certain percentage of their salary, they can't be traded for another 75 days. So now teams have to be more strategic when it comes to getting to the salary cap floor, which San Jose just recently did with trading for the contract of Carey Price. Also, teams who have there's a slow decline, and then there's the rapid decline as well. The LA Kings, yeah, they made the playoffs for 4 straight years, and they've lost in the first round. An older Anze Kopitar, which there's rumors that this is going to be his last year, but also the Drew Doughty contract. He was signed to that $11 million AAV deal 5 years after they won the cup, but he's only played more than 60 games in half of those years. He's into year 7 of that 8-year deal with the LA Kings. So and also the team decline has been fast for the LA Kings. They had to go into a short rebuild, and that's how they got Quentin Byfield with the number 2 overall pick. But Jonathan Quick's decline wasn't so fast. For 4 years after they won the cup, he was still at least keeping them afloat. But it was just offense was starting to fade for the LA Kings, and they weren't able to keep even role players like a Tyler Toffoli, which it's hard to keep track of which team he's on because he's been on so many now. But he's a big factor into what he's what they were able to do. There was a coaching change. Daryl Sutter quickly left after that. Although and Dustin Brown, their captain, was going right into his 30s when they won the Stanley Cup in 2014. So they got Dustin Brown his cup at the right time, just as he was starting to exit his prime. But other guys were able to at least play well in their prime. Jonathan Quick was definitely one who was still amongst one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. And also we mentioned this with the Pittsburgh Penguins, what's going on in the cup window. It feels like right now, 2 teams have won cups recently, although the Panthers are in a different echelon right now when it comes to like making history. I've talked about Chicago, I've talked about Pittsburgh, I've talked about Tampa Bay. But you think about teams that have won one Stanley Cup in the last like 10 years. The Colorado Avalanche are kind of good. We don't know what they are right now. As a team that's quietly adding during the offseason. I know that they added. I know that they re-signed Brock Nelson to a $7 million deal, which that deal has gotten fairly criticized by a lot of fans, and myself included, for a slower second line center that's on the older side, that's aging. But what happened with the Mikko Rantanen trade? Are you going to be able to replace that with Marty Necas, who one of the co-hosts of Locked On Avalanche just recently went on Locked On NHL saying that he's going to be making around the $8 million range, which Mikko Rantanen is now now starting his first year in Dallas under 12. Can you get more production for less? Which is what Panther fans are wondering, which when it comes to the next step that, although it's really hard to imagine, with the guys like Anton Lundell, we've seen one step from Anton Lundell is like how much of a next step can he actually take? Which I'm a big believer in Anton Lundell for what he can do as a 200-foot player. And Mackie Samoskevich, although he's making a cheaper salary right now for $775K, he's going to be the replacement for Evan Rodriguez when the Panthers do arrive at that time where they do have to get cap compliant, which we'll see what Mackie Samoskevich can be, almost scoring 20 goals, and who knows how he fares in the defensive part of the game, and which is once again the Panthers' bread and butter. But yeah, the Colorado Avalanche are kind of going through trying to figure out who they are. Yeah, they were, and let's not forget that was a team that made 9 total transactions in the first few months of the season as far as replacing their roster in season. You don't see that often, but the Colorado Avalanche were able to do it. And yeah, it looks like a little bit of a purgatory for them, but they're kind of struggling to get back to winning multiple rounds and even getting back to a conference final. The knock on them for many years was they couldn't get past the second round. The one time that they did it, they won the cup. Same thing with Washington. Ovi's only been past the second round once, the year he won the cup. So that's the thing about extending guys. Guys get older. What can you do when it comes to replacing with cheaper talent, which the Panthers, although they're lower in the prospect pool tiers, we'll see how they're able to manage things, especially when things open up even more come next season, and guys are fighting for those AHL guys are fighting for for roster spots, because I'm I'm not so certain that they're going to be traded away this season, at least not this season, at least. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss more about some footwear from Panthers general manager Bill Zito and Carter Verhaeghe's day with the Cup. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. And really cool event that went on, multiple events that went on this weekend of days with the Cup as Lord Stanley is back in South Florida, and also the fact that Bill Zito was able to attend a cancer survivorship event with U.S. Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz in South Florida, which this is the second time that she's held it in South Florida. And the Panthers are big, and they're big on the initiative of cancer research, and with their initiative called Panthers on the Prowl, which they have some artwork around the South Florida area that's dedicated not only to the wildlife of the actual animal, the Florida Panther, and hockey culture in itself. But the standout of the event for Panthers general manager Bill Zito is the footwear that he was sporting throughout the event, and gonna share my do a little bit of a screen share and do a little bit of a full screen here. As you can see here, he has the little bit of a drip from the water from the ocean there, and you can see a little bit of the handwriting from the championship for the Florida Panthers there. So pretty cool aesthetic there for Bill Zito. And it's not only him that was sporting those shoes. It was also Debbie Wasserman Schultz there. So just flipping some of the slides here. So you see Bill Zito pointing to Debbie's shoes as well. But also on the back, just skipping through here, the Leaping Panther is on the very back of those Nike shoes. You see on one side, it's the 2024 Stanley Cup. And on the other shoe, more than likely, is 25. So you zoom in, you do a little bit of a close-up there. You see the years, you see some hearts there. But at least for my heart, I'm very thankful to see the Leaping Panther, which cool to see. I'm very excited the fact that the Leaping Panther is going to be coming back, at least in the game setting, when we get to the Winter Classic, which, even though it's going to be the modern version, which that's probably what the ownership is going to do, I'm glad that we will in the future see that in a game, which I can't wait to do a podcast, by the way, whenever those Winter Classic uniforms do come out. But Carter Verhaeghe also had his day with the Cup. Carter Verhaeghe, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, once with the Tampa Bay Lightning, the other two with the Florida Panthers. Last year, he brought it to his home in Ontario. There was that famous picture of him holding it with his wife, Casey, which it looked like they almost dropped the cup there from what I remember there. And then Carter Verhaeghe also came to kind of save the day here. But a little bit of something different that Carter Verhaeghe was able to do is bring 3 different groups of kids and with special needs, the Special Olympics of South Florida, the Best Buddies International, and the Florida Panthers adaptive hockey team. So sharing it with them, and also bringing them into the Panthers locker room as well. So they get to see every day of where the Panthers enter to get dressed and ready to go on the ice, and also a chance to at least close the facility and have them share it with obviously the Stanley Cup present there. And obviously for me, this also is near and dear because my mother is a special ed teacher. She deals with kids with autism. So it's actually very cool that Carter Verhaeghe is doing this. So this is a little bit of a quote from Carter Verhaeghe from the event. Here's what he had to say. Quote, "We got 3 great organizations here. To see them all together, making new friends, and to see them with the Cup too, they're going crazy. It's so special for them to have this opportunity too. It's great sharing with them." Close quote. And also Carter Verhaeghe later on in the day. He also was able to throw a private party with family and friends at Greek Island Tavern, and that's where I was able to find out the restaurant that he had his party in due to Instagram. The Greek Tavern on Ocean Drive posted it on Instagram and also posted all the pictures of the players from the Panthers that were there: Matthew Tkachuk, Seth Jones, AJ Greer, Nico Mikla, and Anton Lindell. Those were the following guys who got to attend. So a little bit of a different day with the cup that Carter Verhaeghe was able to do, as opposed to doing the same old. So glad that once again that it's a little bit of a different routine instead of the same old stuff. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But before I do get out of here, the hockey family lost a few people this week. Goaltender Ken Dryden, the guy who defied odds as far as being one of the shorter goaltenders, and one of the guys who was able to. We talk about goaltending development and how players don't usually go in between the pipes right away, but Ken Dryden defied all those odds. A Stanley Cup champion with Montreal, and he was the color commentator from the 1980 Winter Olympics when the USA upset the Soviet Union in not the championship game, but the round before the championship game. USA ended up winning gold, but you had to get through the Soviets in order to win gold. And Al Michaels with the call, "Do you believe in miracles?" And then Ken Dryden saying, "Yes!" So a very iconic call, once again, that lives forever in hockey history. And also Stephen Mindillo, who played Jim Ahern in the movie Slapshot. Unfortunately, he's also passed away this past weekend, as posted, that I found out on X. But gotta save this one for last, because this is a Florida Panthers podcast after all. If you guys have gone to Panther games throughout the years, you guys know of the doppelganger of Ric Flair. Yes, unfortunately, he has also passed. His name was Stephen Elario, and this was found out via a post on Facebook from one of the fans saying that Stephen Elario has unfortunately passed. And I always appreciated the entertainment team for not only pointing to Stephen and the whole crowd saying "woo" as far as that impersonating Ric Flair. I mean, we're here to have fun. We're here to be entertained. And the fact is that he was the face of that. And it was basically every game for at least a lot of games that Stephen was on the Jumbotron, and that we got to kind of connect with him. And I also really, truly love Stephen's minimalist approach when attending games. Just slacks, a t-shirt, and a blazer. Very simple. Yeah, he didn't wear necessarily Panther colors when he would go to games, but just the fact that he was very, very clean with his look, and also with representing who what his claim to fame was when he would attend Panther games. And it's going to be different going to the barn this year. And I hope that when opening night does come around, I hope there is some tribute to Stephen when we get there, when we get to that point, because he was truly. I never got to meet him, unfortunately, but the fact that this is someone that the Panther community has been able to have a little bit of a discussion, and even the ones who have met him have said nothing but nice things. That's how you're going to be remembered in life. Nobody's going to care how much you make. Nobody's going to care about necessarily your profession. What people will care about is how you treat everybody that you encounter with. And nothing but positive things that I've heard about Stephen Elario. And from us here at the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, we want to wish his family all the best. Condolences, rest in peace, and Godspeed. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. No show tomorrow, as I'm continuing to travel for these next few days, but we will be back with you on Wednesday for another edition of the show to bring you everything in relation to the Florida Panthers. Thank you guys once again for listening. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows in the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So Armando Velez signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.